Why did ancient women deal with periods? Imagine you are a woman living 20,000 years ago. No pads, no tampons, no menstrual cups, no painkillers, no private bathroom, and no one to explain what was happening to your body. Then one morning, you wake up and you see blood. Today, billions of women know exactly what that means. But thousands of years ago, what did she think? What did she do? What could she possibly use to absorb the bleeding? Did she keep hunting, working, traveling with her group? Or was she forced to stay away? Because people believed menstrual blood was a curse, a source of impurity, or even a mysterious power? The surprising part is, the answer is far more complicated than most people imagine. Because the history of menstruation isn't just the history of biology, it's the history of how societies have treated women for thousands of years. And here's the biggest twist. An ancient woman may have experienced far fewer periods than a modern woman, if menstruation has existed since long before the first cities, the first kingdoms, or even agriculture. Then how did women live with it for hundreds of thousands of years? Why did something so completely natural become one of history's most hidden and misunderstood human experiences? And why, even today, in a world filled with medicine, technology, and modern hygiene, do millions of women still struggle to access basic menstrual products? Most people assume ancient women simply used cloth, leaves, moss, or animal skins. But the truth is, we don't really know, because the evidence is incredibly rare. Fabric rots away. Plants decompose. The small objects women relied on every month almost never survive. In the archaeological record, and history itself was written mostly by men. So one of the most common biological experiences in human history left behind almost no trace at all. And that is our first mystery. Number, before modern menstrual products. Imagine you are a woman living 20,000 years ago. You move with the herds. You follow the water. You follow the seasons. No bathroom, no privacy, no sanitary pads, no tampons, and no disposable products of any kind. Yet your body still bleeds every month. So, what did ancient women actually do? The truth is, archaeology can't give us one simple answer. Soft cloth, plant fibers, moss, dry grass, animal fur, or soft pieces of leather may all have been used by different communities. The problem is, almost all of those materials decay after thousands of years. They almost completely disappear from the archaeological record. So, most of what we know comes from indirect evidence, ancient clothing, weaving tools, traditional societies, and written records that appeared much later. In history, there was never one single solution for every woman. A woman living in a cold climate may have managed her period very differently from someone living in the tropics. But here's the first twist. The answer may be far simpler than we imagine. Some ancient women may not have used anything that resembles a modern sanitary product. They may have simply let the blood soak into their clothing. They washed when water was available, or they simply kept walking, kept working, kept living their daily lives. Because long before humans invented products to hide menstruation, women first had to learn how to live with it. And then, as the first civilizations began to rise, menstrual blood stopped being just a biological reality. It became something mysterious, something people both feared and tried to control. When blood became a mystery, then everything began to change. Humans built the first cities. They invented writing, and for the first time, they recorded what they believed about the human body. In ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient Greece, and ancient Rome, menstruation was no longer seen as just a biological process. It became a mystery because ancient people knew nothing about hormones, They didn't understand ovulation, and they had no idea why women bled every month, yet survived. So, they created their own explanations. In some cultures, menstrual blood was associated with impurity, danger, and things that should be avoided. Elsewhere, it was connected to fertility, the cycles of the moon, the creation of new life, and mysterious powers that no one could explain. Some ancient physicians even believed that menstruation was the body's way of removing excess blood. Today, modern science shows us those ideas were not biological facts. They were historical beliefs created in a world that simply didn't understand how the human body really works. But here's the twist. The same phenomenon, the same blood. In one culture, it was feared. It was considered unclean. In another, it was respected, connected to fertility, power, and even the sacred. Menstruation never changed. What changed was the way people understood it. And that leads to another question. If beliefs about menstruation were so different from one culture to another, then what did ancient women actually use during their periods? What did women actually use? So, what did ancient women actually use? The answer is there wasn't just one method. In societies that knew how to weave cloth, women may have used folded pieces of fabric. They washed them, they dried them, and used them again and again elsewhere. Natural materials found in the environment may have been used to absorb menstrual blood, but almost all of those materials decompose, which means they rarely survive for thousands of years. So, archaeology can only give us small pieces of the story. In fact, some women may not have used any separate absorbent material at all. Their clothing may have absorbed the blood they washed their bodies whenever water was available, and life simply went on. Then, thousands of years passed. Today, a woman can walk into a store and choose sanitary pads, tampons, menstrual cups, period underwear, dozens of products, different technologies, different levels of comfort and convenience. Yet, despite all that progress, the goal has never changed: to manage the bleeding, to stay as clean as possible, to reduce the inconvenience, and to keep living life from a simple piece of reusable cloth washed beside an ancient river to ultra-absorbent materials engineered in modern factories. Thousands of years have passed, but the next twist isn't about technology, it's about the female body itself, because an ancient woman may have experienced far fewer menstrual periods over her lifetime than a woman living today. Did ancient women have fewer periods? But here's the first big twist. A modern woman who begins menstruating in her early teens and reaches menopause decades later may experience hundreds of menstrual cycles over her lifetime. But for many women living before the modern era, the story may have been very different. In many communities, the first period may have started later in life. Food wasn't always reliable. The body used enormous amounts of energy to work, to travel, and simply to survive. Then came pregnancy. Menstruation stopped. A child was born, and months or even years of breastfeeding could delay the return of ovulation and menstruation. Today, this is known as lactational amenorrhea. If a woman experienced multiple pregnancies and breastfed for long periods, she may have had far fewer menstrual cycles throughout her lifetime. But here's what matters. Not every ancient woman lived the same life, climate, nutrition, life expectancy, the number of pregnancies, the length of breastfeeding, and daily living conditions varied enormously from one community to another. So there is no single number that applies to everyone. But here's the real twist. We often assume the modern pattern of menstruation is simply the way it has always been. Yet for most of human history, that may not have been true. A woman today may experience far more menstrual cycles than many women who lived before the modern world. And that leads to an even bigger question. If menstruation itself has changed far less than we imagine, why have humans become more and more silent about it over thousands of years? When menstruation became something no one talked about, then something strange began to happen. Human knowledge expanded, medicine advanced, cities grew larger, yet menstruation became more and more something people avoided talking about. During the Middle Ages and through many later centuries, religious beliefs, social traditions, and medical misconceptions shaped very different ideas about women's bodies. In some communities, women who were menstruating were considered ritually unclean. Elsewhere, they were expected to avoid certain activities or stay away from particular places or objects. These beliefs varied widely from one culture to another, and not every woman experienced the same restrictions. But one thing hardly changed. Women still had to live. They still worked. They farmed. They traded. They cared for their children. They cooked. They traveled. And they carried on even during the days when their bodies were bleeding and often in pain. Yet history rarely tells us what those days actually felt like, not because menstruation didn't exist, but because it was pushed into silence. Then, the modern world arrived. Science began to understand the menstrual cycle. Menstrual products were manufactured on a massive scale, but the silence didn't disappear. For decades, advertisements for menstrual products used blue liquid instead of red, as if, even when talking about blood, we still didn't want to see it for what it was. That's the paradox. A biological process older than civilization itself, yet after thousands of years, humanity still needed a very long time to speak about it openly. And then a quiet revolution began. It didn't start in a palace. It didn't start on a battlefield. It began with small, everyday inventions that would change the lives of millions of women. The menstrual product revolution. Then, the world began to change. By the late 19th century, and especially throughout the 20th century, menstruation slowly emerged from behind closed doors. The first commercial products appeared. At first, they were expensive, bulky, and many women felt embarrassed to buy them in public. But over time, disposable sanitary pads became more common. Tampons were introduced. New materials were developed. Waterproof layers, adhesive backing, highly absorbent materials that made products thinner, lighter, and far more comfortable to use. Older methods didn't disappear. Menstrual cups, first developed in the 20th century, were improved with modern medical-grade materials. Then, period underwear offered yet another new option. For the first time in history, many women could choose how to manage their periods based on their own bodies, their lifestyle, and their personal needs. Some preferred disposable products, others reusable options. Some valued convenience, others cared more about cost or reducing environmental waste. Technology completely transformed the way humans manage an ancient biological process. But here's the twist. Technology can create better products, but it cannot erase embarrassment. It cannot ensure that every woman can afford the products she needs, and it cannot bring clean water, safe toilets, and proper sanitation to every community around the world. In other words, humanity has solved much of the materials problem, but not the entire social problem. And perhaps the most surprising part is this: in a world where humans have walked on the moon and created artificial intelligence, millions of people still face an ancient question this month. What will I use to manage to my period? Why does period poverty still exist in 2026? But here's the greatest paradox of all. It's 2026. Humans can launch spacecraft into orbit, develop artificial intelligence, build cities with tens of millions of people. Yet in many parts of the world, millions of people still cannot access safe and suitable menstrual products. Some can't afford to buy them every month. Some don't have clean water to wash themselves or clean, reusable products. Others don't have access to safe, private toilets. Some don't even have accurate information to understand what is happening inside their own bodies. This problem has a name, period poverty, and its impact goes far beyond inconvenience. A student may miss days of school. A worker may lose valuable income using unsafe materials or lacking basic sanitation. Can increase health and hygiene risks. Shame, stigma, and misinformation also prevent many people from seeking help when something doesn't feel right. And deeper than all of that is something else: dignity, the ability to manage a completely normal biological process safely, privately, and without feeling ashamed. Thousands of years ago, women faced menstruation in a world without science, without modern materials, without technology. But here's the twist. The modern world has the knowledge. It has the technology. It has the products. The problem is that not everyone can reach them. Perhaps that is the greatest paradox of all. The challenge for ancient people was that the solution didn't exist. The challenge for modern humanity is that the solution already exists, but it still hasn't reached everyone. What changed wasn't the body. A woman living 20,000 years ago and a woman living today, their bodies still experience the same fundamental biological process. What changed was the world around them. Knowledge, medicine, hygiene, technology, access to menstrual products, and the way to society talks about menstruation. And here is the biggest twist. For thousands of years, the real issue was never just the blood. It was how people understood it, how they hid it, and how they treated those who experienced it. Perhaps human history was never written only through wars, or king, or empires, or magnificent cities. It was also written through stories that almost never appeared in history books. The stories of billions of women who kept hunting, kept working, kept giving birth, kept raising families, and helped build human civilization while living through the same biological process, generation after generation, from a simple piece of cloth washed beside an ancient river to modern products designed through science and technology. The world has changed, but the human body still carries a story older than civilization itself. And perhaps the greatest mystery about menstruation isn't what ancient women used, it's why something that has existed since long before recorded history took thousands of years before humanity could finally talk about it as something completely normal.